Hey there, IndyCar fans and Indy 500 fans. This is our Indy 500 race preview edition of the Inside Line. I'm Nathan Brown, the motorsports insider with the Indianapolis Star, joined as always by my co-host, Joey Barnes. We're here taping on Friday afternoon. We've just seen Carb Day practice action finished up. The Weenie 500 is over with. We've got the pit stop competition going on as we speak, and once that's finished with, the crazy evening of concerts will be taking place here. It's really starting to feel like it is time for an Indy 500, and that feels, I would admit, incredibly refreshing given the week or so that we've had here on the track that has been focused on just about everything other than racing. It's maybe a good place to both dive in and tie off some non-race related storylines here with you, Joey. We learned since we taped this pod on Monday evening that Tim Cindric, Ron Rzucki, and Kyle Moyer, the IndyCar president, managing director, and general manager, all longtime veterans of this team, are no longer with Team Penske. This team will have new strategists and in some case engineers for the Indy 500. Today was their lone day to work with them on track before the race, although a lot of them are some fairly familiar faces and names for the most part. But I want to go back to Wednesday. We see this email pop into our inboxes right on 10:40 in the morning, and it was frankly something, although I don't know that I would have expected Kyle Moyer to be wrapped into this. This was kind of something that I was trying to hint at a little bit at the end of our show on Monday. I don't like saying that some people need to be fired, and I don't necessarily know. I'm still honestly working through my thoughts on all of this. It seems like it changes every time I talk to some new people and get some new perspective on it. But I kind of felt like this is the direction in general that this was all headed. What were some of your thoughts initially when we saw this news on Wednesday morning?
Yeah, it was tricky because, like when we were talking about it on the last show, I personally didn't think any changes were going to come until postseason. I didn't think that you were going to go into the Indy 500 or go into Detroit, a Penske-owned race, with this kind of black cloud, these kind of changes abruptly. I thought suspension's cool, fine. I didn't necessarily think we'd be looking at dismissals, departures, firings, whatever you want to call it. So I was a little stunned by that aspect of it, but you felt like something needed to change. And I mean, like you, I don't want to sit here and support anyone losing their jobs. This is a really tough business. It's really challenging. It's competitive. A lot of people in this paddock become our friends, and it sucks whenever you see certain situations like this play out. The thing that I keep going back to, and I had a chance to talk to a few people, because even though unfortunately I'm not on site, and my phone's been blowing up, and I've been able to talk to quite a few people who have boots on the ground there, and different representatives from different teams, et cetera. And I go back to what Doug said. Doug Bowles, IMS and IndyCar president, which was, that Roger was devastated. And then obviously later we see Roger's one-on-one with Fox Sports reporter Jamie Little. But I took the devastation aspect of it as he's devastated because he's tried to be hands-off with this Penske program, the Team Penske program, and he put his faith and his trust in certain people. And really that wasn't necessarily something that played out in a positive way over time. Maybe at the beginning of his tenure with owning IMS and IndyCar and Team Penske back in 2020, but the last 2 years were on a very downward trend, and these were significant offenses and significant questions of integrity by the paddock. And I think that for an appearance, not even just for, I think the key word here is you got to look at the optics of it more than anything. I think that when you're dealing with multiple teams, multiple manufacturers, and there's different deals that need to be done, you're looking at a scenario where a decision had to be made. Unfortunately,
Yeah, I look at this and I we got a chance to talk to some of the drivers. Well, I mean, we got a chance to talk to and hear from all of the drivers, all 33 in Sunday's field for the Indy 500 on Thursday during media day. And clearly, at least publicly, the driver most frustrated and hurt and a little angry, I think was maybe be safe to say, was Scott McLaughlin. We didn't get a whole lot out of Will Power. Will is in a really weird situation right now where he's walking on eggshells, quite frankly. He's out of contract at the end of the year. He wants to get hired back there, I imagine. I don't know where they are privately in that process. Publicly, Tim had said for months now that they would visit this after the Indy 500 and kind of see where things were. And I think, Will is someone who's spent more than a decade and a half at this race team. I'm sure would love to be back. That's certainly going to be the best opportunity for him to continue to try and achieve wins and championships and Indy 500s at the kind of twilight end of his career. So he didn't say a ton other than just being sad to see someone like Ron Rzuski, who he's worked with on his car for quite a long time, go, along with Tim Cindric, who had been the leader of this race team the entire time that Will had been there. Josef predictably was very buttoned up, said at the front, I think maybe even before it was asked or in reference to the very first question, that he's here to talk about the race, and a sly, kind of overt reference to, I'm not here to talk about things that took place off track and the personnel around it. He, did make reference to the belief that he still can win this race from 32nd. And I think there are a lot of drivers in this field who feel the exact same way. And I'm really interested, and we can talk more once we get into the race portion of this podcast to see what Josef does with this opportunity to make history back from 32nd. But McLaughlin, which is who I want to get to and spend a little time with, because I think he raised some good fair points. He felt like, ultimately, he said, I work for Roger Penske. I understand the decisions. I respect the decisions. But he felt like things had been blown out of proportion. And he said, I'm frustrated with people in this paddock, my peers, and also made reference to I'm upset with people in this room, referencing the media. Now, I don't know who he was talking about. Generally speaking, I think most of the at least kind of straight news reporting that I have seen on this has been very diligent. Look, the first thing that we heard on Sunday was that two cars from Team Penske had failed the tech inspection process. There was a legally modified part on the back of this car that we went on to learn over the next 24 hours had been on these cars on 2 and sometimes 3, I think at times, of these cars for the last year and a half or so. We later got a little bit of a better sense that this very well may not have any sort of a competitive advantage on these cars because of where it is positioned, so close to the body and the back of the car that there's very little, if any, air flowing over the top of this car. For those of you who don't know, we're talking about the attenuator, which is the safety device on the back of the car. And what it appears Team Penske has done leading into the 2024 season, there were some additional support panels that Dallara mandated be put on here, I believe, in preparation for what was going to be a heavier car once the hybrid was launched and came online in the middle of the season. And so these support panels got put on here, and they jut right up against the actual attenuator. And so there was a little gap in there, but where these two pieces meet. And from what we can tell in photos and some visual evidence, it appears that Team Penske had first just kind of gotten this bright sticky glue that was showing from attaching these pieces, gotten that off of there, filled in the seam between these two pieces, kind of sanded it down, and then smoothed it over to where it really, unless you get really close, looks like one smooth, flush part. You wouldn't be able to tell that there was anything weird or abnormal going on unless you looked at this part alongside another normal attenuator in the field. So a long-winded way of saying, from Scott McLaughlin's standpoint, there are massive penalties, fines, suspensions before there were firings that were going to affect the workflow of all three of these cars that came into this month as probably, I would say being on our short list of 7 or 8 cars that we all thought had the best chance of winning this year's Indy 500. And now 2 of their chances have been incredibly hindered. And Scott McLaughlin has lost the number 1 guy on his team and is certainly not in the same spot or with the same circumstances as he goes into this race. So I could understand Scott's frustration in some level, at least from his standpoint, in that we're talking about what was largely what we believe to at least be a cosmetic change to these cars, and it ended up with 3 people being fired. How do you feel from your standpoint, Joey? This has all been covered, and do you understand or see where Scott has been coming from?
I mean, I see both sides of it. To be blunt, I look at this and I can see where Scott's coming from because, one, he's in the walls of Team Penske. He knows the intricacies. He knows the details, the heavy amount of attention to detail that Team Penske is known for, right? That's why you get the mantra Penske perfect for a reason. And effectively, it's people he's worked close with, maybe not directly with, and Tim Cindric and Rzuski, but certainly indirectly. There's debriefs, et cetera. And so I get that part of it. I think the other part of this is the rest of the paddock sees this as a second offense. And I think to some of what Graham Rahal has been saying to different media, whether it's on a radio show or it's on a news outlet, and just the fact that even if this is such a minuscule thing, this is paraphrasing what Graham said, but if this is such a minuscule thing and it's such a blatantly obvious thing, it makes you wonder, like, what else they could be hiding. Like, because if you're going to be this obvious about that, then there's clearly other intricacies that people have suspicions about. So, so I understand that side of it too. And look, if it was any other team, if this was any other team on the grid, I'm not going to just flat out point to another team and call another team name just for the hell of it. But let's just say it's Team X. If this is Team X and not Team Penske, I think that we're looking at a significantly different outcry from the paddock. Especially if this is the first,
if this is the first like team-wide offense that we've seen. 100%. I mean, I'll go out and say it. If Alex Palou and Scott Dixon's cars were found to have had this on their cars on Sunday, and we haven't seen any sort of penalties for this team, in quite some time, certainly not a widespread thing like we hadn't pushed past last year, I do not think Chip Ganassi is firing Mike Hull. That's where we are with this right now. No, this is firing Mike Hull and Taylor Kyle and Barry Wanzer, basically.
Yeah. And Tim Cindric has over 20 years that organization.
Yeah, more than 25. So that would be the equivalent. And I just don't see that happening. But this is a different situation, both in what happened last year, and it's a different situation in what Roger has on the line and the greater care that I think I'm sure, knowing Roger, that he, especially after last year, beat into all of these guys' heads about the extra care in which they had to make when it came down to flirting with the edges of the rules. I think that's where a lot of this boils into.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And, the thing that's kind of interesting is we've seen Tim Cindric on social media be very public with his thoughts almost in a way that comes across to me anyway, that he's like trying to clear his name and clear the fact that he's upheld integrity, that these things are such a minuscule element to it. And maybe it's just for public perception, or maybe it's because he does feel, I don't know, a sense of guilt or whatever you want to call it. But, with that though, I think what was fascinating that I took from media day was not just the McLaughlin and the Newgarden saying, "I'm just trying to remain happy," in his quote. But I think the other thing is when we had a chance to talk to Alex Palou, and it was kind of pointed out, like Alex Palou was saying, "I didn't go there and point it out. I just got to the line and I walked over and thought and I was just trying to be funny, but I didn't realize that it was this serious." It almost makes you wonder if inadvertently Alex Palou put a target on his back from Team Penske, and we might see the likes of them run him differently because there's an edge that maybe wasn't. People are already tired of Alex Palou beating them, Team Penske especially, and that didn't need any more fuel to the fire. And even though Alex is saying this the same way that other people have said their own stories about things, I kind of wonder if this is creating an edge. And you're talking about Scott McLaughlin and his words and his comments about being tired about the paddock, effectively doing what they're doing, saying what they're saying, attributing blame, whatever you want to call it. I think that you look at the people who have been outspoken and you look at the people who are at the center of that. And I think that we're going to get a very aggressive race on Sunday as a result. I mean, I know we're going to get into it. Carb day today was incredibly racier than normal. A lot of that attributed to the cool conditions, but I think this is building up to where some of those tempers could be taken out with what they do on the racetrack.
I think where I will try and leave this, I've been mulling over this for a couple of days. I was even trying to put together some sort of an analysis piece that I still have not yet fully written, and I will get to it at some point here in the next 12 hours or so. But I think when I look at Roger Penske's decision that he ultimately made that we learned about on Wednesday morning, and I think an apt comparison is when you see a big name college football or basketball coach who's ultimately fired, and he's fired after something that the one event most recent in and of itself is not necessarily a fireable offense, but there are things that continue to happen that illustrate that coach does not have a handle in one way or another fully over the workings of his team. I'm not saying that Tim Cindric knew that these attenuators had been modified. I'm not saying that Ron Rzuski or Kyle Moyer knew, although making a material change to your car. Now, I don't know the freedom of which folks within that organization work, but you certainly get the sense that there's very little that goes on in those teams that those at the very high ranks of it don't know, whether they're ordering it or not, or just getting suggestions from one and saying, yep, sure, that sounds good. I don't know. But this is something that was actively done to these cars. This was a decision that these teams were going to do this and race with these cars in this way, which is different than what we saw if you believe Team Penske's story with the push-to-pass scandal. There are not many people that would that still believe Josef and Tim's story on that, and I kind of waffle back and forth on it depending on the day, if I'm totally honest. But their position was, we tested out some settings on the on our push to pass system as we were doing some hybrid testing, and ultimately this code got left in the car and we forgot about it, didn't know about it, went through St. Pete and almost went through the Long Beach race weekend with it in there until we noticed it in a real fluky situation during warm up the Sunday before that Long Beach race. So if I'm looking there with the most conservative or glowing takeaway glowing picture of Team Penske from that, if you will. That was an accident that had some very big competitive impacts on that race. I don't think Josef was not going to win that race and not beat Pato O'Ward or Colton Herta. But it gave him and Scott McLaughlin a competitive advantage nonetheless. Now, this instance that we saw here that we saw came to light last Sunday, but which has very clearly been on these cars for more than a year. This is an instance of someone or a group of people looking at a part on the car and deciding to make changes to it, either without consulting the rulebook or without thinking that the rulebook matters to them. And I don't want to blow that out of proportion, because I don't know that this in and of itself is this cardinal sin. But I would imagine, now I have not been part of a race team before, but I would think if you are going and changing a part of the car that you have not ever changed or altered before, that you would go and consult the rule book, and you would see you would ask the simple question: are we allowed to do this? Are we not allowed to do this? And whether that's a group of people checking the rule book, whether that's sending that up the ladder to someone like Ron Rzuski or Kyle Moyer or Tim Cindric to get that clarification on that question, I don't know. But this is a decision that was made within this team to alter a spec part that is not supposed to be altered or tampered or changed with in any way. And we don't know that this necessarily made this safety piece any less safe, but there's always a chance of something like that. And I'm glad we didn't learn about it through that manner. So I feel like this is something that, again, in and of itself is not a fireable offense, but it shows a lack of thoroughness, I think, within this team. And when you combine it with what happened last year and frankly, some still widely simmering frustrations with what happened there in Team Penske with push to pass and how it was handled, and some other decisions that have happened over the course of Roger Penske's ownership. And I think in the end, if push to pass hadn't happened, if the end of the 2023 500 hadn't happened, if IndyCar didn't find itself deep in manufacturer negotiations for new contracts, if the end to the 2024 Gateway race and how that was officiated hadn't happened, I don't know that we're necessarily in this same place. But it is a compilation of all of these events that even before we got here on Sunday and Monday, there were lots of questions being asked about conflict of either overt conflicts of interest here or at least the optics of it. And I think this just put it over the edge, and Roger Penske was put in a place where he had to show that he meant business and that he heard and understood the concerns of the paddock, and that he was willing to go and make necessary changes on all this. And Sadek came to this point. On the topic of the creation of some sort of a third a third party officiating arm, while I think that is a great idea, and I think ultimately that will quell a lot of concerns in this paddock, I do think it feels, again, a little bit shows a little bit of a lack of forethought in the series, which, if I'm going to be frank, is not the first time I felt that way. It seems very reactive and not proactive. That should have been something that in late 2019 or early 2020, Roger Penske and Penske Corp and Penske Entertainment should have recognized could be a problem down the road and gone and fixed the problem before it came one. And I think we would have been in a lot different place. I think from what I've heard from some conversations, it ultimately seems like Roger, until very recently, took any suggestion that this should be created as a suggestion that he he specifically lacked integrity. And again, I don't think anyone has been trying to suggest that here, but this is far deeper than him, and this has a really big impact on how this series moves forward. So I feel like he made the decisions he had to make. I don't know. I'm sure this series could have gone on and raced the 500. I don't know that we would have had any sorts of protests or people leaving the series. You might have had some owners speak a little bit louder about all of this, but I don't know that he had to do this. But ultimately, I think he felt like this was the right thing to do to send a message. And I do think with these moves that he made on Wednesday, I think this paddock will get back to healing and looking forwards instead of backwards a lot sooner than if he hadn't made those decisions.
Yeah, I think you nailed a lot of points there, and a lot that I agree with. I think that, if none of those previous events happened, race control was put into question with Gateway finish, with Laguna, with that weird pit cycle that allowed Josef to go from like 17th to 2nd or something stupid before he faded late. And, you look at all of this, and if none of that happens, I don't think that you're looking at a scenario where the paddock is putting Penske under a microscope. I think that if it was only this and it was an isolated thing, everyone probably would have shrugged and been like, all right, whatever. Because even if it's a competitive advantage of 0.0002 of reduced drag, which is a net gain, but still, I don't think people would have bat an eyelash compared to what it is now, based on the fact of everything that's come about. So now it's like, it's almost as if the paddock had felt bullied for the last few years and just not felt like they were in control of their own futures and not in control of their own systems, and feeling like that the series had their own best interest. And effectively now that the paddock is fighting back is what it is. And so now you've got this raging bit where, as what McLaughlin mentioned, and where other people are voicing their concerns. So it's going to be interesting where that is moving forward. I will say that it's very clear. Yeah, this all should have changed in 2019. They should have instituted something at the end of 2019 and built some stuff and been proactive. Unfortunately, that's not where we are. We have to figure out a way to fix this and fix this now. And in my opinion, I think this needs to take precedence over anything. New car, new engine, etc. Like, yes, those are absolutely paramount and absolutely important. But I don't think that those things materialize to fruition if the integrity remains in question by leaving this open-ended. You have to fix it. It's as simple as that. Whether that's a third-party officiating crew or whatever, an overhaul to the tech inspection, not necessarily with the personnel, but how it's done. At the very least, like, I know laser scans aren't necessarily possible because, like, Doug Bowles touched on the fact that, unlike IMSA and NASCAR, the molds of this carbon fiber tub, since it's a 14-year-old, 15-year-old chassis, have a tendency to change. So it's a complex situation. At the end of the day, you got to do something. You can't just sit still. So, and any way they go, people like you, me, and the fans are gonna probably find something that we're not gonna like about it. But ultimately, we're gonna be happier that they're trying to move in a direction of positive change. And I think that's the biggest thing that needs to happen right now.
The last thing I want to say on this, I admit I didn't really know a whole lot about the tech inspection process. I was a little surprised. I was a little surprised that this is something, and I frankly, I think I want to say I think Doug Bowles has handled this as well as he possibly could have, as someone who didn't necessarily ask for this job 3 months ago and who has been. I mean, this is Doug's busiest week of the year, anyways, and it got twice as busy. And I don't know that that's really possible on a healthy sleep schedule. So for Doug's sake, looking forward to this weekend being over and this race being a success, as it seemingly has been so far and will continue to be. But I was surprised to hear him say on, I think it was maybe Wednesday in our press conference, that even though this is a part that you are not allowed to modify, and it is a safety device, that it is not something that the series and its tech inspection process ever routinely checks, which is very weird to me. I mean, I know you can't go through with a fine-tooth comb and look at every single part on the car, but Doug was talking through, we check the seat belts, We check some other safety parts on it, and I would kind of feel like, knowing how big a role that this attenuator has in the safety of this car and the driver that's in it, I would just have thought that there would have been some eye put towards, glancing at this and making sure it hasn't been changed, especially um, early in 2024 when this piece had changed and you had added these panels. I would have thought that would be a perfect time to check and make sure that everyone has these panels on properly, that no funny business has been gotten into with those, and that would have been the time where this could have gotten caught in St. Pete or ahead of the $1 million challenge, or they'll race at Long Beach, certainly before we would have gotten to the 2024 Indy 500. So I think there's an added layer of thoroughness that this tech inspection process needs to go through to make sure that it catches some things like this that, again, I don't know necessarily give a competitive advantage to a car, but are something that are important enough that if it's altered or modified, you could get bumped from 11th on the grid for the Indy 500 to 32nd. That's all I'm saying. So we'll see what changes we notice in that moving forward, whether there are longer windows for cars to get a little bit more thorough inspection in the tech inspection process. I don't know how that would work or how that would alter a the race weekend cadence that we're used to, with sometimes practices being so jammed up right next to a practice, or warm-ups with a race. I don't know what room there is for a change like that to be made, as schedules for weekends are already laid out. But we'll have to see what the rest of 2025 brings on that, as well as what we see at the start of 2026 with the 6-month or so off season to make some changes that Doug referenced on Monday and Wednesday.
So we got carb day practice today.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's turn the page and let's go to some fun stuff. Let's get this black cloud over, and let's we're close to race day. Carb day's officially in the books, and ironically, we just got done talking about him, but Josef Newgarden, the belle of the ball, Mr. Focus Forward, starting 32nd. He was carving up through some people in that session, and within the first half hour, put up a lap of 2:25.687, and that car looks real stout. We saw Takuma Sato look really good, and it was P2, but then in the last few minutes, like there was some sort of mechanical issue that was unknown. Radio, TV didn't quite pick up exactly what the issue was. I don't know if you had a chance to find something after the fact, but
haven't heard yet.
And then we got Scott Dixon in third, and so it was a very interesting session. It was very, very fast. Cool temperatures, a lot of passing, a lot of wild stuff. We saw some interesting scenarios, I think, that could impact race day, in my opinion, because it's going to leave some doubt in some people's minds. I mean, Connor Daly struggled a little bit with the setup because, for those that aren't aware, prior to qualifying, Honda changed out their engines. Post-qualifying, Chevy changed out their engines between Monday and today, I should say, right ahead of Park Day. So some of these Chevy power teams didn't quite, like Connor said, they replaced the motor as they do, as normal procedure. And for whatever reason, the car felt a little bit different. And, they got back out there. Don't know if they got closer to what he was looking for, but it was interesting. Christian Rasmussen had some issues. Alexander Rossi had a water pump break. So really rough go for Ed Carpenter Racing in general that session. You're looking at Sato's issue. Ray Hall had a mechanical issue with smoke pluming out the back of that. And then obviously Ryan Hunter-Ray's Ryan Bull Chevrolet went up in a blaze. So interesting to see this is potentially going to play out in the race, because you kind of don't know what you're going to have until the green flag drops.
My initial thought, and it brings me back to last year when we saw Honda have the issues that they had throughout the whole month and led into the race with multiple engine failures. I can think of at least.
Don't forget about Chevrolet Plenum.
Well, yeah, Chevy had their Plenum issues in qualifying, and then Honda had their engine issues. Just in the race alone, I think it was Catherine Legg and Marcus Armstrong and maybe also Felix Rosenquist I don't remember if that was the case with Felix or not, but I remember there being 2 or 3 throughout the field. I mean, I imagine if indeed Takuma Sato's was an engine failure, and you've got, it seems like a weird coincidence that would be 2 cars at the same team, but at the same time, it's also 2 cars from the same manufacturer on the last practice, and that's gotta. I bet there's a lot of um, chaotic and fast work going on inside that Honda camp to make sure that, first to diagnose what happened to those 2 cars as much as they possibly can, because ultimately that work and that discovery process typically happens either when the engines are sent back to Detroit for Chevy or sent out to California from a Honda standpoint. And we don't have time to do that. They've got to figure out what happened to these cars as soon as humanly possible, because the last thing you want to have happen is the engine of, really, when it comes down to it from a race winning standpoint, of Alex Palou or Scott Dixon, or the highest, best qualifier from the Andretti Global camp, Marcus Ericsson, blowing in the middle or the end of this race with, sorry, excuse my yawn. It's been a week with this race on the line. So I'm sure there's a lot of work going back in the Honda garage, the team garages, the Honda camp, to try and figure that out, make sure that's all up to snuff when we come on Sunday.
And not to mention, though, doesn't Honda have that weird thing? I don't know this, but it's something that I had heard. Don't they have a thing where the one-off entries don't have backup engines?
I think that's probably the design of it. I imagine, just like the design of a full season engine lease is.
Because Marco couldn't go to a backup. I remember he was complaining that he couldn't go to a backup engine.
My guess is, if it fails and it is no longer in use, it's not like they're gonna, not have Marco, or in this case Takuma Sato, start the race. If I were to guess, I would imagine that that's something similar, or maybe even just a little bit more strict than the 4 engine rule for a full season entrant on the Honda and Chevy side. So I would have to think, if indeed Takuma's issue is an engine, that he's going to have a fresh one in his car. It's not like we're going to only have 32 cars start this race. But it's a level of concern. You want to use this last 2-hour practice that we have here to just try a thing or two and see if it works or not. I know, talking to Alexander Rossi coming into this practice today, you could tell on Monday after practice, and even a couple of days separated from it right before we got into practice today, that he was really confident. They had only 1 or 2 things they wanted to tinker with and experiment with to see where his race car was, but he's slated to start 12th on the grid, and is absolutely in a position where, if he has one of the best cars in this race come Sunday, there's no reason why he can't work his way into the top 3 or the top 5, getting ready for the start of that last stint in a position where maybe you got to move up a couple spots, but you're right there in it. And so hopefully this is just a piece that needs to be replaced, that failed, and they can get that put back on the car between now and the start of the race, and there's no effect to his race car, because I've felt like all month he was one of those drivers that, if he has a good race car and he's starting anywhere inside the top 15 or maybe even the top 20, is a guy that I feel like knows enough and has performed well enough on this track that he could work his way up there. So we will have to see if that is the case for Alexander Rossi, but he's a guy I frankly really can't wait to watch as we get to the race on Sunday. He's got a little bit of ground to make up, and sometimes, kind of like with Josef Newgarden's 2023 Indy 500 and the way he started, I believe, 17th and worked his way up to putting himself in the right spot with 40, 50 laps to go, would be interesting to see if someone like Alexander Rossi can do the same thing.
Yeah, there's a little bit of, I guess the easy way to put this is some of my impressions from carb day practice, outside of the fact that obviously Josef looked good, Takuma looked good, Dixon looked good. Devlin DeFrancesco P4 on the timesheets when it was all said and done. And then obviously Will Power being up there is no surprise. Felix, Leo is P7, and Pato. But I look at this, Connor Daly wasn't happy with his car, and he's still P10. And so it's still a car that's got speed in it, obviously. And, so I think the thing that I'm kind of fascinated with is the conditions are very similar on race day to what we're seeing today. Cool temperatures, probably hovering right around 65 to 70, something like that. I kind of look at Alex Palou and I go, you're sitting here 14th. You didn't look like you were really doing the same thing you had done in some of the other practice sessions. You weren't looking like you were intentionally. To me, I look at that and think he's studying other people's maneuvers. He's studying other people's stuff. And that's the perception that I picked up on just from that session. And I look at someone like, Kyle Kirkwood, just behind him, potentially doing the same. They ended up having during the pit stop practice towards the tail end, pit stop simulations, they banged out a 6-second pit stop there, which is absolutely stout. And Newgarden did the same, to be fair. There was no other pit crew that I saw that was reported on anyway that was in that bracket. So it's going to be really fascinating to see where this comes together. But from a carb day standpoint, given the miscues for certain people, there's definitely, this is the most unknown Indy 500, like unpredictable one going into it. Like I've been doing this for 13 years now, and this is easily the most unpredictable coming across. I'm over here going, I can make an argument for 15 easily to go up there and show up and show out and kiss the bricks, take the baby board, whatever you want to call it, drink the milk, preferably. It's going to be the most unpredictable Indy 500. And oh, by the way, your pole sitter, a rookie, never been on pole in an IndyCar race, let alone on an oval, is going to lead the field in the biggest race in the world. And he was 29th in the session. He logged the most laps, 85 laps in that session, and was down on the leaderboard. And I think there's a huge unknown with how's he going to arc into the corner in turn one when he's got two people next to him. How are they going to file? I thought there might be a little bit of Sato, him, and Pato, the front row guys, working together a little bit to get kind of maybe just a feel for it. There's none of that. So we're in for an interesting treat for the start of this race for sure.
Yeah, I look at the results that Schwartzman has had in practice situations, basically everything except for Fast Friday and qualifying over the course of these 2 weeks. Actually, I looked up the stat when I was putting together my kind of 33 nuggets to know heading into the race piece that published this morning. And because I wanted to kind of see for myself what Robert Schwartzman's rise from being someone that we thought would have a legit chance of being in the LCQ to ending up on first in the Fast 12 and then the Fast 6 and then winning the pole, what it had been. And outside Fast Friday, Schwartzman has finished no better than either 25th or 26th in any practice session the entire month. So it leads me to think, and especially when you see the results again today, that he finishes 29th fastest, it leaves you the idea that this is not a car that is very well set up for race day. We will see if that's the case, but it seems like, that points to me and says that's a car that responded really well when they got that boost put in it. They do have some great engineers on that staff, and they clearly built a very fast car, and a car that Schwartzman, a rookie, could handle and push to its limit without going over the line. But I worry that he's going to find himself in a situation kind of like like we saw with, say, Marco Andretti in 2020 when he started on pole and didn't ever lead a lap in the race, was already second or third by the start finish line at the end of lap one. I don't even know that he led a corner of that race. I think he lost the lead by the time we got into turn one and never led a lap of the race. And I wonder if that is the fate that we are going to see here for Robert Schwartzman. He's got two guys starting right next to him. that are incredibly strong, incredibly fast. And I'm sure drivers who would love nothing more, not necessarily to lead this race the entire way, because it's a terrible idea in terms of fuel mileage standpoint. The only thing that leading this race a bunch does is keep you out of other people's messes. And go ahead.
I was going to say, and the one thing that before I lose this point was just for those that don't understand, for those who are tuning in and are trying to understand the sport of IndyCar, this isn't NASCAR in the sense. In NASCAR, when you go and you have an engine change, you get relegated to the back of the field.
Yes.
Start in the back. In this case, we were talking about Takuma Sato earlier, potentially changing an engine. If they do, he still holds on to his second starting spot just outside of Schwartzman.
Yep. The only thing that gets you sent to the back of the field is using a different driver. So Colton Herta, a couple of years ago, for example, crashed his car, demolished it on carb day. They had to pull out a brand new car for him to use in the race, a car that had not practiced or run on IMS all month. And Colton Herta still kept that, I think it was starting 25th or so, that 25th starting spot. So it doesn't matter if you do an engine change. It doesn't matter if you get a new chassis. You're still starting in the same spot that you do here on Sunday. So, yeah, I look at this group of starters, and I wonder what we will see in terms of guys trading off this lead. I wonder if Chip Ganassi Racing is able to make it up to the front of this field, and you see some trading off of the lead between Scott Dixon and Alex Palou to both help each other save fuel, learn a little bit about what making passes with the hybrid feels like actually in the race, in the conditions that we will see on Sunday. And also be able to stay out of the fray with some other folks, because if you have this interesting mix of drivers here in this top 10 to 12, you've got some incredibly strong, experienced drivers, guys that have won this race before in Takuma Sato and Scott Dixon and Marcus Ericsson. We've also got some real inexperience here with Robert Schwartzman. Christian Lundgaard has never really run up the front of this race before. He's made up chunks of positions in his 3 years that he's run here with RLL, but never started up anywhere close to as high as 8th. We'll be interested to see how he handles that. David Malukas, his first year in a Foyt car, again, hasn't factored too much into the 500 before, has had some great oval results at some other tracks. But a first time that we're seeing him up here. Kiffin Simpson is kind of in the middle-ish of the field. Devlin DeFrancesco, a little bit of an unknown. So you've got this really interesting mix of drivers, both who are trying to make a name for themselves and drivers who are either have incredible experience and are trying to win this for the first time, or guys like Dixon and Ericsson and Sato who are trying to add to their resumes and have won this race and know what it takes. And you just worry if you're sitting too far back in the pack, say, 6th, 7th, 8th in line, that you get caught up in someone else's mess when you could have just tried to push the envelope and just try to get up into that like 3rd or 4th position that I think is good and pretty comfortable to run in, at least for the first, say, 2/3 of this race.
So we were just talking about Takuma Sato. I just got this in my inbox. It's officially identified as a driveline issue.
Yeah.
So there's that. Doesn't look like it's going to be an engine change, just a driveline issue at the moment. Let me ask you. Well, let me throw this, but before we have to go into our potential picks and our top 5 or however we're going to break that down. One, I think it's clear. Robert Schwartzman he might be a rookie on pole. He just needs to finish the 500 miles, get a nice solid top 20 finish, and that's a damn good day. And that's what I'll say on that. And I don't think we need to put too many expectations on him. If he goes out there and balls out and wins, awesome. Then that's an even better story than what it was on pole day. But the thing that I want to touch on is this before we go on our picks. Given what's happened and transpired over this past week, and given the fact that we saw how fast Josef Newgarden was on carb day and literally carving through people, what do you think the reaction of the paddock and the fan base will be that if he goes out there and while it's history and it's 3 Indy 500s in a row. What do you anticipate the actual reaction? What's the pulse of the environment there of what that would be?
I think when you're strictly talking the paddock, I think there would be a lot of annoyance. I think there are drivers who are, you might say, friendly with Josef, but maybe wouldn't consider him a really dear, close friend. I don't know who his dear, close friends in this paddock are at this point. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do anything other than just tip your cap to him if he does it. I mean, to do something that it's really hard in this day and age to do something at a race that has been run for 108 times before this Sunday, to do something that no one has ever done before, and then to in winning 3 straight, and then to do it, accomplish it by doing something else that no one has ever done before, in winning from farther back than 28th. And as I mentioned that, I should note that the last time someone won from 28th was 1936. It's not like we saw this a couple years ago. I'd have to go back. I know I was doing a little research yesterday, and I think Josef's win from 17th or whatever it was back in 2023 was the last time we saw this race won from outside the top 8 in close to 10 years. It's just something that you just don't, frankly, see a car not qualify well and then have that great of a car that it is not only able to carve its way through the mid pack, but then also run incredibly well in clean air, which is the one thing that I'm curious about with Josef. Again, I know you can make changes to that effect a little bit when you make your pit stops, but Josef's team is going to have to set this car up. And by no means am I an engineer, so I don't know all the verbiage and the phrasing and what they're doing to make this car better, say in clean air or dirty air. But Josef is going to have to be able to have a car where he can make passes, and lots of them at one time, and try to get from, say, 32nd up to 24th by the first pit stop, and then maybe 24th to 18th by the second pit stop, and 18th to 12th by the third pit stop, and 12th to 8th by the fourth, and then 8th to 4th by the fifth one. You've got to make progressive moves up the pack, and so he's always got to be able to pass people. And the problem with that is that car able to do what it needs to do also when you're up there in first or second and battling with someone and trying to find that peak speed over that final half of a lap to either make a pass or hold on to the race, whether you do or don't have any more hybrid left in you. I know I can think of Will Power, for example, from a couple years ago. I don't remember which exactly, but I know there was a year where he started up really, in a really great spot on the grid and dropped a few spots and then just kept dropping because this car was set up to run in clean air. And when you get 10th to 12th in the pack, it just proves kind of hard sometimes to make back up those spots depending on the way in which you set your car up, because it is so different to drive these cars sitting 8th or 9th in the pack versus first or second, or even third probably in the pack. And so I'm curious to see how Josef and his team can manage that and talk through that and find a way that they can have a great car that can run and make leaps and bounds through the field from 32nd, and also is able to be tuned back a little bit every single stop to where he could potentially be at a place where he could compete. Again, we saw guys crash out from those same positions last year. So Josef's race very easily could be done on lap 1. That's just some of the consequences that you have for starting that far back in the pack. Your race is not entirely up to you as much as it might be if you were starting 3rd or 4th or 5th or even 11th or 12th. So we'll see. Ultimately, do you think it is possible that Josef could win this race on Sunday?
Yeah, I do. I mostly because he can run less downforce than other guys, even back there, or run the same level of downforce. That car's just got more speed. That's a simple way to put it. And let's not forget, the way that he's won this race each of the last 2 years has been not leading Like it's been making the move on the last lap. So in one case, just 2 corners away after being passed while leading at the stripe, but it's so that he's mostly used to being the hunter, not the hunted in that case. And so, yeah, it's very capable. And, I think the one key element in this that I don't even know how we touch on it because there's so much unknown to it. And we're going to go straight into our picks here in a second, but it is the hybrid. The hybrid is such a unknown with regeneration and deployment. And I love that some drivers are talking about how they're worried that the hybrid can be used to cover mistakes. If a driver just gets a little wiggle out of a corner and they know they're about to be under attack, they can just hit that button and bam, it's your Fast and Furious boost, right? And you can defend it the same way that you use push to pass on road and street courses. So it'll be fascinating to see how that comes together, because also if you're the lead car coming to the white flag, if you're out of hybrid juice, how do you defend? Because the other guy is going to be able to just trail behind you and get that run, because the regeneration comes from just drafting and being in the tow right now. So it's fascinating. I think Josef is one that we get to discuss now with just a few minutes left on this pod. I can throw it to you one of two different ways. You can either hand me your top 5 or you can throw me your favorite and your dark horse.
So I made picks publicly in IndyStar. I had to make them, I think, on Monday night or Tuesday. So we already knew the penalties for the Penske cars. So I will stick with those. I've been waffling a little bit on them, but I will stick with Alex Palou as my winner. Second place, Scott Dixon. Third place, Josef Newgarden. Those are the first 3 I had made, and I will finish this off 4th place, Pato Award, and I will round out my top 5 with Scott McLaughlin. And I'll even throw a dark horse in there. So let's classify dark horse as I mean, what do you want to say? Outside the top 12, outside the top 15 from a starting standpoint?
Yeah, we could do let's do top 20, because a driver
outside the top 20.
We haven't had a driver win this race from 20th or worse since 1987. Okay. So let's try to have a 30-year-old history get reset here.
All right. If you're asking that, and I'll even say outside of Josef, because I think that's like the obvious pick for me. If I had to pick someone who's starting outside the top 20 to win this race, who's not Josef Newgarden, I will go with.
Would you count though if they qualified 21st, it got bumped up to 19th like Kyle Larson?
we can be flexible on that. I'm gonna say Elio Castroneves. I wonder a little bit with him having not raced. I mean, think about it. Like, he hasn't raced with this hybrid. This is his first race with this in the car. Not to say that this race is very similar to how any of the other races with the hybrid. So I don't know that there's as much lost knowledge. And again, he's had so many practices to work through this. This will be his 25th 500. So he knows this place like the back of his hand. I imagine this is just a piece of technology that he can try to use to do some of the same things that he's used to doing already. He's got, inside his camp, in the greater Chip Ganassi Racing, Meyer Shank Racing family, he's got folks who are starting 4th, 5th, and 6th that he's having debriefs with. So even if his car didn't qualify as well, I mean, frankly, we haven't seen Elio qualify, I don't think, all that well since 2021 when he won this race, and I think he started 8th. So if there's someone that if I'm sitting 2nd or 3rd in this race that I really don't want in my rear view mirror with 30 or 40 laps to go, I'd say it's Elio. There are some big names in that group outside the top 20, but I just don't know. I don't know if some of these cars back here quite have the speed and the handling that I would assume it would require to work your way up through and gobble up 20 or more people. So I'm going to go with the experience that Elio has, if there's anyone that can come back from that far back and do it. So give me your top 5 and give me your dark horse here.
All right. So my top 5, I would say Oh my gosh, because it's been a struggle. I've been thinking about this a lot. I think Takuma Sato, and then I think
So you think Takuma Sato is going to win the race?
I do.
Okay.
I think he gets his third. I just every time he starts fourth or better, he goes on and wins the race.
It's a pretty wild stat.
Yeah. So I think I look at that and I'm just like, okay. And he's usually methodical. Now he could be methodical at the front. So I think you're looking at a combination of Sato, followed by Alex Palou finishing runner-up again. And then I think you're looking at Pato being P3. And then you're looking at, let's say, Scott McLaughlin goes up, gets P4. And then I actually like Kiffin Simpson. I like what I've seen out of him. And he's in a Ganassi car. I like Kiffin Simpson to go up there and bang out a surprise P5. My dark horse, who I actually think has personally an equal chance of winning this race, as someone that starts on the front row, as anyone that starts on the front row, would be Kyle Kirkwood. Being back in 23rd, we've seen him carve through the field the last few years when Andretti hasn't been this strong. And he's been in the mix each of the last couple of years. And I think you let him be in the mix there at the end and figure out a way to not be P4 towards the end, but be right in the throes of it. I think he's going to be a contender and one to be reckoned with.
It's a great pick. I wondered that myself too. And I think we heard from him on Monday, and maybe it was even a little bit yesterday during media day too. It seems like he left feeling like his car was great through the first 3 days of practice and Fast Friday as well. And then something seems like it kind of flipped a switch a little bit, and they're trying to get some answers and figure out exactly where this car is. Maybe that was more from a qualifying standpoint, that they were left really puzzled because of how well they ranked in the no-tow reports in the first 3 days before we threw the boost on. I don't know. But yeah, that wouldn't be a surprise at all either. As you mentioned, Kyle has been there or thereabouts each of the last 2 years, including the year in which he, got flipped over and was skidding on the top of his car in his really scary incident in turn 2. I think he was running right around the top 5 at that point with 20 laps to go. And at that point, I think looked like he might have had as fast of a car as Josef and was charging real fast and looked like had that race stayed green that we could have had a really exciting duel down to the wire, kind of a little bit like we had last year in 2024 with Scott Dixon and Alexander Rossi and Pato O'Ward and Josef Newgarden. So that would be a good one to see.
I've got one more thought before we jump off. Marcus Ericsson said that if he wins this race, he's taking the Borg Warner to the Indiana Pacers game because they play the Knicks on Sunday night. Just for the sake of seeing it, that would be something.
That would be I imagine that scene inside of Gainbridge Fieldhouse is going to be unlike many we've seen for a home Pacers playoff game in a long time. This is going to be a rowdy crowd. I'm sure you'll have plenty of people that will be coming from either from the race, people that have been partying at home watching the race or been downtown watching the race. It's going to be a really great atmosphere, both at the 500 here for race day. We've got some maybe a little bit of a chilly morning, but ultimately an incredibly comfortable race. Clear skies, no threats of rain. You've got a jam-packed, sold-out grandstands. I'm sure the infield has got loads and loads of people. Sunshine, high 60s, a really interesting field with drivers, great experienced race-winning drivers spread throughout this field, which is not something that we always see. I think my last thought here, and it's echoing something that you mentioned earlier. We've gone into this race the last couple of years either feeling like Chevy had an advantage over Honda, or Ganassi had an advantage over Penske, or vice versa. And I don't really feel like anyone has an outsized advantage, at least that we know or have seen yet. And probably part of that is just the way in which qualifying is played out. You've got Andretti cars spread throughout the field from Marcus Ericsson qualifying 9th to Kyle Kirkwood qualifying 25th and starting 23rd, and Colton Herta start qualifying 29th and starting 27th. But the Ganassi cars were good but not great in qualifying. The Penske cars have been spread out, as we mentioned. I think the quietest camp that I feel like I've not talked at all about this month has been Arrow McLaren. And Pato O'Ward mentioned it and kind of reaffirmed that too a little bit here when we had their team press conference earlier this morning. They said that they have not been as happy with their race car as they've been in recent years. And there was still a lot of work that they were needing to put in during this carb day practice to try and get things dialed into the right spot. I have not yet talked to that team to get a feel if they got that work done. Certainly this is Pato's best qualifying result of his career, but that car has not seemed nearly as racy as I feel like I've gotten used to, certainly in the last three races that we've had in the Indy 500. So I'll be interested to see if Pato looks any different once we actually get to Sunday afternoon, but we will have to wait and see for that.
Yeah,
that is it. Let's go racing. Thanks for everyone for listening to this edition of Pit Pass Live. We'll be back with you early next week for a race recap edition of the Indy 500 and give a tiny little look ahead to the Detroit Grand Prix, kind of level set where the championship sits. But I'm sure this race is going to give us plenty to talk about. So thank you guys for tuning in, for following us as we've been churning out some more frequent episodes here this month of May. It's going to feel a lot like this once we get into heat of the summer, June, July with not a single off weekend, and then the home stretch of August. Going to have a podcast nearly every single week. So excited to get back on here with you, Joey, and chat about IndyCar just about every single week here. Thanks for joining us and boosting up this audience. I think, really enjoyed doing this over the last couple months, and look forward to bringing you guys a lot more thoughts, opinions, reporting, and just hopefully a fun podcast and audio listen to cover all of your IndyCar news. So thanks for watching. For those of you watching on YouTube and those of you listening on your podcast platforms, this is our latest edition of Pit Pass Live. We'll be back with you next week to talk about the 109th running of the Indianapolis 500.